Aloha, welcome to the Fast, Healthy, and Ona Cooking Comfort Food series. Tonight we'll be learning how to make holiday pies, sweet and savory. My name is Lonnie, and I'm an AARP Hawaii volunteer. I'll be your host tonight on behalf of our sponsors, Kaunua Senior Services on Maui, Uala Leaf Cafe at Windward Community College, and AARP Welcome. For those of you who are new or who may be unfamiliar with AARP Hawaii, we are a membership organization for people 50 and older, but what we do for everyone. We hope that with this series, you can learn some techniques that you can use to build or maintain a healthy lifestyle. Let's do a quick bit of housekeeping. This is a picture of what you should be seeing at the bottom of your Zoom screen on a PC and possibly the top of the screen on an iPad. Everybody is currently on mute. If you want to submit a question or comment, please click on the button that says Q&A and type in your question. I will be monitoring the questions and making sure they get asked. If you're watching on Facebook Live, you may type your questions in the comments. We won't be using the raise hand command because questions will be submitted in the Q&A. The chat command isn't necessarily going to be used unless you want to communicate a technical issue. Alice Swift, Dave DeWitt, and Jackie Bolin are standing by to help. We recommend that you select speaker side-by-side view rather than gallery view for this presentation. To do this by clicking on the upper right part of your screen. Once you're in that view, you can change the size of the slides or of the speaker simply by clicking and dragging on the middle bar. Finally, we have added closed captioning to this presentation for those who have difficulty hearing. You can turn this off on your end by clicking on the CC Live transcript button in the lower right side of your screen and clicking on Hide Subtitle. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Chef Daniel, who will be leading us through this cooking series. Take it away. I don't think I can hear you.
I'm muted. Okay, there we go.
Okay,
Can you hear
yes, yes.
I talk with my hands a lot, so I could probably actually get through the demo without audio, but you know, it's nice to hear what's going on. Well, welcome back. This is our next to the last class, I think, in our series for the comfort foods. And tonight we're focusing on pies, and ideally, my focus, if you can make a really nice pie crust, then the rest is easy. That's what I want to hopefully make sure everybody takes away tonight. I know our last one next week is pot roast, I think comfort food pot roast. So after that, it'll be the holidays, and then we'll be bringing in 2022. So tonight we've got a couple things on deck. The recipe that I sent out, well, I sent it to Jackie a number of months ago, so some of you may have it. Some of you may not. I know last week I made a couple things that were not on the list, and I told Jackie I would send her recipes, and then I forgot. So I put my email down at the bottom. I don't know if you can see it. I'll pull it up later. It's simple. It's danswift@hawaii.edu. So you can always email me directly because I don't want to put extra work on Jackie if I'm promising something and then I don't deliver. So I forget if I don't have it written down, and I don't write things down while I'm doing the show. So I had forgotten that. But whatever it was last week, and if you have questions about other things this week, feel free anytime to shoot me emails. So the recipe that I sent was for a basic pie dough and then an apple pie using fresh apples. But I want to talk about different fruit pies and different types of pies after we focus on what we're making with the pie crust. So simple, not complicated, easy for kids all the way through adults. And it's a really nice traditional holiday type of exercise or activity that you can do at home. and utilize the products that you have. And keep in mind, tonight we're doing sweet pies, but you can also do savory pies, meat pies. Shepherd's pie is a popular one. That's usually with potatoes, but turkey pot pie, chicken pot pie, those sorts of things tend to be really popular, at least here and among our students. And that's the savory side of things. So a good utilization recipe for leftover turkey that you might have, or gravy left over. You just put it in a pie shell, top it and bake it, and it's done. So really quick, let's just run through the ingredients for a basic pie crust. Super simple. And again, we're not doing like gluten-free recipes. There are flour substitutes out there, but tonight I'm just going to focus on the traditional type of pie crust. And there's really three primary ingredients: the flour, the fat, and then water that's used to bind it. You have to have some form of liquid there. If you just did the flour and fat, you'd have like a sugar-free shortbread dough. And we've done shortbread in one of the previous classes, and honestly, you can use that recipe as a crust for lemon bars and other things. It's all the same ingredients, it's just different amounts of, or different ratios of the ingredients and how they're mixed. And a simple way to remember these primary ingredients for a basic dough, you might have heard of 1, 2, 3 dough. It's where there's 3 parts of flour, 2 parts of fat, and 1 part of water to bind it together. A lot of times people will put salt and sugar into the dough. I included that in this particular recipe in small quantities, but salt is really optional depending on what you're making with the dough. Like if you were doing a savory pie, you really don't need salt in your crust. You probably don't even need sugar because you're keeping it on the savory side. But a little bit of sugar wouldn't hurt it, so don't feel bad if you make one that has sugar and you want to make a savory pie, it will still work. People wouldn't notice because you don't put that much in there. So these ingredients are the ones that come together to make a basic dough, and I'm going to show you that here in a second. And then we'll go over, as we kind of go through the process, some of the types of pies. And there's classifications or categories of pies, and I wrote a few of them down here. We're going to try to make custard pie tonight. I think I'm going to have time. I pre-made the shell, blind baked it, so it should be ready in a chocolate custard pie. Hopefully we'll have time. So we'll make sure that we get to that. I want to make sure we make it. Fresh fruit pie, which is what we're doing tonight. Sometimes they'll classify crust topped pie. This is going to be a galette basically, or what I call a rustic apple tart. So it's a sort of a free form. We're not using a pie shell. We're just using a flat sheet. So that will work for this. But you may see other categories for pies beyond this. This is just some of the primary ones. Cooked fruit, and that's where you'd probably use fruit such as blueberries, cherries, and things like that, where they're cooked in a pot or in a pan on the stove. The liquid is thickened, and it basically turns out like the canned filling that you would get in the store, the cherry, the blueberry, the apple, and all of that. It's cooked in advance of baking in the crust. So it's already sort of done for you, and you can adjust the liquid. So that is a technique that I really enjoy, especially if you have fruit at home that's starting to turn or get a little overly ripe. You can cook it down and make a filling that can be used for tarts, pies, or any number of desserts. The other one that I listed was just a chiffon pie. Sometimes meringue pies are classified in that category, but that's basically where you have whipped egg whites either folded into the mixture that's the filling of the pie, or put on top, like a lemon meringue pie is your most common one. So different categories, different functions, but once you start with the crust and you end up dialing this in, then the sky's the limit for getting creative. And you'll see that tonight with some of the stuff that I've made. So feel free, if you have questions, to fire a couple my way as I go through the process, Lonnie.
Sure, I do have a question from Colleen. Can you use oil as a fat substitute in the crust recipe?
Yeah, that's a great question. You can. It doesn't turn out quite as well. Shortening is what we're using tonight, but traditionally what is recommended is a solid at room temperature fat, because the cooler and the colder it is in the mixing process, the better. You can still make a crust. It doesn't turn out quite the same way, but if you're trying to stay away from butter, like I'm not using it this evening, but you could use margarine, you could use shortening, you could use coconut fat. It works as well, but any fat that's a solid at room temperature works really, really well. The most tender crust that you can get is made with lard. It's not popular. It fell out of favor 20 years ago. It's starting to have a resurgence now because you can get lard in the store that it's been deodorized, they call it. So it basically is exactly like shortening. It just provides a little bit better tenderness in a pie crust, but of course you got your cholesterol that you wouldn't get with your vegetable oil. You'll still get your cholesterol with your butters and things like that, but shortening is probably your best bet, or a flavored shortening like margarine that has butter flavor and color and makes you think that it's butter, and it has some of those attributes to it, but yet it's a little bit healthier for you. So really good question. And those are the primary ingredients. So here's our fat, our shortening. I've got my flour, I've got my little bit of sugar and a little bit of salt, and then my water. And what I'm going to do is just dump in the flour. And all of this is chilled. It's ideal if you can make sure that everything's cold. Your fat, your bowl, your sugar, of course, your water. Usually it's ice water. My ice melted, but that's okay. The water's cold. So I know I'm in good shape there. And in the recipe, if you have it, you may have noticed that this one and some of the other ones that you may find ask you to dissolve either your sugar or your salt or both in the water. I put that in there. The challenge that you'll run into in doing that is your water is cold. And if you are an iced tea drinker and maybe you put sugar in your iced tea and you stir it up, any cold liquid has a really difficult time dissolving granular salt or sugar in it. So if I put my salt into my cold water and I stir it up, it'll start to dissolve, and it will dissolve over time, but it's a little bit more difficult. Whereas if this were warm water, you throw it in, it dissolves immediately. So you can, I recommend that if you have time. And one way to really assure that it's 100% dissolved is to simply put it in a little bit of warm water, dissolve it, and then add your ice water to that. And that works. And sugar could go in here or it could go directly in. And then I'm going to just set this aside because what I want to do is mix the shortening and the flour together with that little bit of sugar to make sort of almost like a clay. You'll see it come together. And hopefully it won't fly all over the place. I'll put my hands over the bowl and hope that I can catch most of it on the very lowest speed possible. And of course, this could be done by hand as well. And even on low speed, it'll just start to break up the fat that's in there. Because even if it's a shortening, and we know shortening is sort of soft at room temperature, when it's cold, it's a little firm. And what happens here is it breaks those little pieces of fat up and it dissolves them into the fat, or excuse me, into the flour mixture.
Marjorie wants to know, will the basic pie dough recipe work for gluten-free option using the same amounts?
What I would recommend, and I just did a class on shortbread yesterday, and someone asked about substituting almond flour for the flour in a shortbread. Most of your gluten-free products like Bob's Red Mill, and there's some other brands out there that make like a one-to-one substitute for flour, but it's gluten-free. So those products do exist. If they don't exist in whatever product you get, more than likely you'll be able to find recipes online for that specific product for really popular items like pie crust and some basic cookies and things like that. So I would recommend whatever it is that you're buying to substitute as a gluten-free product, look online and find the recipes that the manufacturer recommends. They do a lot of testing and they would have more accurate advice than I would. But the one that we use that I keep stocked over here is a one-to-one transferable one. They don't turn out exactly the same, all of the baked goods, but they're pretty close. And then they are gluten-free, which helps. And you can see this has started to crumble, or hopefully you can see this has started to get a little bit crumbly. It's almost like wet sand right now. And it will come together. I want to keep going on it, but I just wanted to show you really quick that I could stop at that point if I were making a flaky pie dough. It's a different class, but this is the point at which I would add that extra water or that water in. So
Now,
I'm just gonna, yeah, I'm just gonna let that continue to mix. Go ahead.
Colleen says the recipe calls for 2 apples, but yield 1 1/4 pounds. Is 2 apples enough?
Oh, that's a great question. I have 4 here. I went to the store to pick up apples today, and I don't know what happened, but everything else seems to be getting bigger, but apples are getting smaller. They had some apples that were like golf balls on sale, nice little bag of apples, but I'm like, I don't really want to peel that many. So I went with Granny Smith. So when we get to that, I'll talk about quantities, and it all depends sort of on the size. Even with the crust, it depends how thick you want it, how big you want it. There's some general guidelines, but a lot of that's going to be up to you. Some of you may be able to get 4 freeform rustic tarts out of this pie dough recipe. And you would maybe, this is a good sized apple. Now, I'm 6'2", I have pretty good sized hands, and that fills my hand. So that's a big apple, maybe twice as big as another one. So you sort of just have to play it by ear. But I'll give you some other pointers when we come to cutting that. So this has formed a nice dough. It almost will look at home, and you could do this by hand as well, but it almost looks like it's a pie dough already. But this won't hold its shape because there's no binding agent in it in the form of the liquid. So I need to now let it continuously run and slowly add that water. And it'll pick it up. You don't want to dump it all in at once because then it'll just sort of slosh around. So I always just sort of gently drizzle it in as it's mixing. I could turn the speed up slightly now, which I did. And then once that all comes together, we'll have a nice dough that won't be much different in texture than the dough that I just showed you when I pulled it out prior to the water. Obviously a little bit stickier because it has all that moisture in it, but it's still going to be very similar. And now we have this nice cold, and feeling that dough, it's cold because all of the ingredients were cold already. And it's formed a nice dough that's a little bit sticky, not too sticky. It shouldn't be like wet or dripping like a biscuit dough or something, but it should have a little bit of tackiness to it. And then this, we're going to want to put a little bit of flour down so it doesn't stick too much to our pan because we want to chill it. I'm going to just drop it on here. A little bit of flour on top so it doesn't get my hands too sticky. And I'm just patting it out flat. Now the recipe that you have calls for 2. Actually, I could probably make 4. I made this earlier and I made 4 smaller ones out of what I had. It just depends on the size that you're wanting, but you could have this and do 2 rounds. But what you want to do is always kind of shape it into a round before you refrigerate it and get it a little bit on the thin side, because you're going to be coming back with a rolling pin and rolling it out. And if you have a big ball and you're trying to flatten it out, it's just extra work for yourself and makes it a lot more difficult. So this would simply then just be put into the refrigerator, and I'll grab the one that I have chilled already. That was quick. Sorry, I don't have a fridge here where I can reach underneath. It's across the room. Okay. And now you can see that that's set up, right? I can even hold it flat. It'll hold its shape. It's chilled just at refrigeration temperature. You can freeze this as well, works perfectly fine. But I'm going to give this a minute to temper. I still want it cold when I roll it out, but I don't want it right out of the refrigerator. So a couple minutes, which is perfect for making the filling, and then I'll come back to this here in a second. Any other questions at the moment, Lonnie? Are we good?
Will the sticky dough be a flaky pie crust for the apple pie?
Oh, that's a great question. No, we're making a mealy pie dough. So there are two primary broad categories of dough, pie crusts. That is, one is flaky, as you said, and one is mealy. Now, the only difference is that you would stop mixing and add the liquid at the stage where I pulled it out and it looked like, wet sand. So it was still little chunks of fat floating around. And then I would add the liquid, mix it so that we retain little teeny pieces of fat so that as it bakes, those rolled out pieces of fat melt, they create a little steam and it'll leave a pocket. So that's the thing with flaky pie dough that separates it from what we made, which is a mealy pie dough, which gets the term or the name mealy from cornmeal, to where you grind or mix the fat in so fine that it's like cornmeal, little tiny pieces, indistinguishable. So great question. But for wet pies, I tend to go with the mealy style, and it's easier to start there. Flaky becomes a little bit more complicated. Not the ingredients are basically the same, but the technique is just a little bit more difficult because you could end up with pockets that soak through, and you have issues with depending on the type of filling that you're using. But great question. So the filling's super simple. We've got the apples, and I did 3 already. I'm going to show you how to do 1 more. I've got a little bit of diced up butter, a little bit of cinnamon. I've got some flour and a little bit of sugar substitute. This is monk fruit sugar. The flour is basically going to absorb the juices that soak out of the fruit. That's one of the problems that you have when you're making fresh fruit, especially with apple and fruits that have a lot of liquid. As they bake, they release that liquid, and then that goes to the bottom of the pie or the tart, and it makes the crust soggy. So that flour will help absorb some of that. And you may notice that they're starting to brown. I did toss them in a little lemon juice, not for flavor, but just to prevent them from browning. But these have only been cut about 15 minutes, and they're already, well, maybe a little bit longer now, and they're already sort of browning. So those are ready to go. I'm just going to take 1 apple that I've already peeled and show you the technique that I use. I cut off both sides like this on the outside of the core, and then I take the 2 little side pieces off, and I just end up with this square core that you can snack on if you want to, but I don't want it in my pie. And then I stand these up on their sides, and I just do simple slices. Now the thickness depends on you. If you're making a giant pie and it's going to bake a little bit longer, you're probably going to want them thicker. If you're doing a small freeform rustic apple tart or galette, you can do them thinner. Jackie had mentioned, is it going to be like the freeform style where you can actually even leave the apple like this, thinly sliced, and put it on a disc of dough and wrap the dough around it so the center of the apples is still exposed, a little bit of butter, a little bit of sugar, and it's baked that way. So there's lots of different techniques in that regard. But tonight we're just going to do a straight, simple mixture here. And those were really big apples. I probably could have got by with 3 in this case, but I'm going to just then add my sugar substitute, my flour, my cinnamon. And you could put salt into this if you wanted to. Add my butter. And then it just needs to get mixed together.
When you were mixing your dough, should you have maybe with the flour and salt, cut the butter in before adding the cold water?
We didn't have any butter in the dough. It was just a shortening dough.
Okay.
But if you were making it with butter, it would be the same process that we have where you're always using the flour and the fat first. Butter, shortening, lard, whatever it is you're using, that always gets cut together first with the salt or the sugar or whatever. That can go in there as well. What you'll notice if you do the salt in the dough and you're not baking it right away, you're maybe refrigerating the dough, you'll see little white spots the next day in your crust. So here I have my dough that was refrigerated. If I just thrown my salt in straight, then I would see little white dots, and that's the salt dissolving, because it's not going to dissolve until it comes into contact with some form of moisture. So the moisture, the humidity in the refrigerator is going to cause it to dissolve, and then you see little dots. Doesn't hurt it, it's no big deal, but professionally we tend to dissolve it first. Great question. And here,
Thelma,
yeah, go ahead.
Thelma wanted to know what kind of apples do you recommend for pies? So many varieties now, only Granny Smiths.
Yeah, that's a great question. There's so many varieties, I don't even know all of them, honestly. The little teeny ones I've never seen before. And that's a great question. I like Granny Smith because they have a good structure to them and they're nice and tart. But you might like a different one, a Honey Crisp, or you can mix them up. Do keep in mind also that they have different sugar levels. So if you're using a Granny Smith, you need a little bit more sugar than you would need if you were using a Honey Crisp or some of the other apples that are higher in sugar content. So it's just sort of up to you to decide. But you can't go wrong with the Granny Smith to me because I like the tartness of it. But everybody's different. If you like eating that type of apple raw, then it probably work good for you in a pie. Okay. So you may have noticed that I started with that round and then I just used my hand to sort of go in a circle and tap it out. You can honestly almost do this completely by hand. You don't need a rolling pin, but I just wanted to show you using a rolling pin, you always start in the middle and you work your way out. So it's from the center out, center out, center out, center out. We don't start at the back and push all the way across because then you're just working it back and forth. So you're always going from the middle out. And then you end up with a nice piece about that size. And that's what we're looking for here.
JL wants to know, can you leave on the skin of the apples?
Yes, absolutely. I do that a lot, but a lot of people don't like that. So I tend for this class, I figured I'd peel them, but normally, honestly, I always leave it on. And I thought about it tonight, but I figured I'd do the extra and peel them. But absolutely, that gives you some fiber, some structure, some color, and I tend to like it that way. So we've got the dough here all filled out. I've got a little pan that I can grab. It's got some parchment paper on it already. You want to be careful. Usually you want to build it on the pan that you plan to bake it in. So if this were in a pie shell, like the blind baked one that I made earlier, I would just transfer it in, fold it, and crimp the edges. Super simple. But I don't want to put all my filling on it when it's sitting on the table. I won't be able to transfer it. So to transfer it, I can just fold it in half. It's still fragile, so I have to be a little bit careful. Transfer it onto the pan, open it up, and then I can come back and put my filling. Now keep in mind, this is only half of the dough, so I would be making a second one as well. And here, you can see where the flour and the butter and the little bit of sugar substitute is mixed together. And I'll put about half in there like that. And that will collapse quite a bit, right? As those bake, they shrink down. And you'll end up with a little bit smaller. And then what I want to do is just close it up, but not all the way. I like to see the apples. So this is why I love this galette or the rustic apple tart, because it's free form. You could do it on any pan. And then we're just kind of bringing in this dough, leaving the center open so we can see the apples. It'll allow the steam to escape. And then we've got something that's perfect and ready to bake as it is. Now, because I used a sugar substitute, I noticed earlier in baking the crusts that we did, that I'll show you here at the end, they don't brown as well. Obviously, the sugar is going to help us in the browning process. So in that case, you want to go with an egg wash. It makes it look a little bit more appealing at the end. If you have sugar in your dough, it's less necessary because you get the brown caramelization from that sugar. So this is just one egg with a tablespoon of water mixed up, and I'm just brushing it on the side. And this would also be what would allow something to stick to it. If I wanted cinnamon sugar, or if I wanted a streusel topping, I have a little bit of topping here. I just took some granola for a quick side, a little bit of nutmeg, and I have a couple granolas here that I can just chop up. Traditionally, it's a streusel topping, but I thought I would try something a little bit different. So I just grabbed a couple of the favorite granolas that I use. One of them is gluten-free as well. So any of the granolas or crispy type things that you find in the store that you might snack on can work well as a topping for this. So you just have to break it up a little bit. You can even probably do it by hand. I'm just chopping it so it's a little bit smaller. And to make sure that that nutmeg sticks, I'm just going to give it a little spritz of the the Pam, which is butter flavored nonstick spray. Toss that around. You could add whatever you want, ginger, different spices, get creative. That's no problem. And then I'm just going to put a little bit on here. It would even stick to the crust because we have that egg wash on there. And then that would be ready to go into the oven. Perfect, just like that. And that's 350 is what I have that set at. For something that size, I'm going to check it at about 30 minutes. So, we'll be done with the class before that comes out. But we do have one that was baked already. And this one is the one that I talked about earlier that had the apples and peaches. And this was canned peaches because it's past peach season. So I just took them and I drained the liquid and utilized that liquid in the filling like a canned filling. And I picked up some apple pie filling. It's up to you. If you don't have time to go through the peeling of fresh fruit and the cutting of it and tossing and all of that, and you want to just go with a canned filling, they have some really, really good ones already. And basically these are cooked fruit fillings. So you can see it already has the juice strained, lightly sweetened. There's some that are no sugar added, some with sugar added, some with cinnamon. There's all kinds. These were actually on sale. That's why I picked them up. But it already has that thick glaze to it. That in the center of this crust baked would just be perfect. You could jazz it up in any way you want to with raisins and things like that. But all of the work's already done for you. And you can get ones that are packed in water or packed in light syrup or 100% natural juices like the peaches that we used here for this. And then I didn't put anything on this other than an egg wash, but I'm going to come back with it. Just a little bit of powdered sugar. And it's such a small amount that it's not really going to add calories or anything to the dish. It's just going to give it a little bit more pleasant look, little contrast. And if you put it on the fruit portion itself, it'll tend to dissolve in a couple minutes. And then you'll have that white outer portion, the fresh, colorful fruit that you have in the middle, and the golden brown crust. Okay. So I think I have time to try to quickly do this custard, hopefully.
Now, on your recipe, it shows 375. So is it 375 or 350?
Either one. These I actually baked at 400 because they weren't browning the way I wanted to. This particular oven, I don't know if you watched, was it last week or maybe it was the cookie class that I did this week. Part of them burned. So this seems to be running a little bit hot. So I scaled this one back to 350. If you do 350, it's no big deal. It's just going to take a little bit longer. What you don't want to do is burn it. You're just looking for golden brown to cook the fruit. I wouldn't go any higher than 400 because you want to make sure if you're using uncooked fruit that it gets cooked in the process at the same time that the crust is done. So you probably know your oven better than me. Every one of them is a little bit different. You just have to sort of run with what your particular oven does. Okay. So I put in the pot here just a little bit of milk. And this is for a custard. Oh, and I just got my recipe wet, or my category components wet. Sorry. So the components for a custard, you'll always have a liquid. It can be milk, it can be water, it can be cream, it can be lemon juice, whatever. Lemon curd would have lemon juice. Lots of different categories for the liquid. You need some form of binding agent. I'm going to use a couple eggs, and I have a little bit of cornstarch here. Sweetener and flavorings are up to you. It can be sugar, it could be sugar substitute. In this case, I'm going to make it chocolate custard. So the sugar's already in here, and actually this will work as part of a binding agent as well. So that works perfectly. And then I have, I grabbed a thing of coffee extract, so I think I would make, if I can get the lid off. It was giving me trouble earlier. I'm going to make a coffee chocolate custard. So a couple drops of that extract in there. And if you followed along, we talked about thickening agents earlier in our series. Lots of different ones out there. And eggs are one, and cornstarch is another. Cornstarch is very common in Chinese style cooking. And I'm going to just mix these ingredients together. And that will create almost like an egg wash, really. And the egg will bind it. I'm going to turn this back on the high. So it'll come to a boil, because with starches, as you know, hopefully, we have to boil them so that they get fully cooked, and it thickens our ingredients the way we want it to be thickened. All right. So this is coming up to a boil really quickly. And then I just need to temper this a little bit. And I don't know if anybody knows what tempering is, but that's where you don't dump direct liquid egg products into a sauce or something. You want to temper it with a little bit of that hot liquid so that it does not clump up and give you scrambled eggs. And this will go kind of quick, so we're about right on time. I don't have the chantilly or the whipped cream or anything to top this with, but that's all right. So I'm just going to add a little bit of this liquid into here to bring the temperature up. Oh, that smells great. I can smell that extract. And then while that's boiling, I can dump this in. And stirring constantly. Because it's boiling, it should come right up to temperature really quickly. It should thicken up nicely with that egg and that cornstarch. This is basically what you do when you make a pumpkin pie, but the oven does the cooking for you. So this is called a stirred custard. So we have baked custard where it's baked in the oven like pumpkin pie, or stirred custard in this case, where it's done there. And then that's about ready to boil. I want to taste it just to make sure. There we go. I didn't add any sugar, you may have noticed, because I have the chocolate. Now I just shut this off, add my chocolate, give it a little stir until that chocolate starts to melt. And of course, when the chocolate melts and then cools, it's going to set up, and that's going to create part of our structure in the tart or the pie itself. And that chocolate melts really quickly. You can sort of see how it's already gone. And if you recall, when we started, we were talking about classifications for pies. If I wanted a chiffon pie, I could whip some egg whites separately, fold them into this mixture, this custard mixture, and it would make it a lot lighter. And that would be classified as a chiffon, chocolate chiffon pie. But we want sort of a dense custard at the bottom. This is for Jackie.
It looks good. Hey, Dan, I have a question.
Yeah.
If you were making a savory pie, would you cook the meat and everything ahead of time?
It depends.
So
If you're making like a chicken pot pie or something like that, then yeah, you would have that gravy and everything already finished and done, for sure. Normally that's the case. Yeah. Is there a particular type that you had in mind style wise?
No, I just originally we were going to talk a little bit about savory pies, and I realized I've never made one. So I was just kind of curious.
Yeah, savory would be exactly the same. This could be, you know, if I had like taco meat or something where it was ground beef that was seasoned, maybe it had spices and tomatoes and things in there, I could do the exact same thing I did with the apple, but do it with meat. I normally recommend that you do cook it in advance And usually it's ground beef unless you're doing like beef Wellington. I know that's popular. Thanks to Gordon Ramsay. You see where they wrap it with puff pastry and bake it to a medium rare, and that has mushroom lining. So you can do either one. You just have to take into account if it's raw and you're working with like raw ground beef or raw ground turkey or chicken or something like that, you're going to get the fat leach out. So it's important to have breadcrumbs or a panada or something inside of it to absorb it. So basically, you know, either one can be done. It's like a meatloaf filling would work, and then you can wrap it up for a meat pie. So yeah, either way works. You just have to think about what happens to that filling as it bakes. Is it leaching out a lot of fat or a lot of moisture? And if it is, how are you adjusting your filling so that it doesn't make your crust soggy? So
Thank you.
yeah, even for like this, traditionally what you would do is melt chocolate and brush the crust with a melted chocolate. Because what happens when you take a hot custard and you pour it into a nice crisp crust like this, you end up, it's steaming and it gets the crust a little bit soggy. So a lot of your regular pie crust based custard pies are usually brushed with chocolate or something to create a barrier. Some people will brush it with jelly or jam. There's a couple products in commercial baking that they use, but you do want something that will sort of act as a barrier to protect the crust so it stays crisp and to keep the custard from soaking it up. What I do, this is the technique I use for my pumpkin pie at home. I'll blind bake my crust. I'll brush it with chocolate and I'll make my pumpkin filling on the stove. And then I pour it in. The crust is protected with a layer of chocolate, and then the custard, when it cools, it sets, and you can't even tell it didn't get baked in the oven, but your crust is not soggy on the bottom. Like most pumpkin pies, it's always a little soggy on the bottom because the crust it's not allowed to crisp up because it's got all this wet custard sitting on top of it. So if you can dial in that crust, then you can start to experiment with techniques. This could have been in a pie shell just as easily as it is in free form. A little bit of extra time, a little bit of extra dishes, but I don't know, I just really like the look of the rustic style. And then for this, you know, any kind of topping would work, but since we're fast, healthy, and Ono emphasizing the healthy, I decided to get a low-fat yogurt. And this one has a little bit of honey in it. So I said, oh, you know, that might be a little bit better topping for this. I'm going to add a touch of vanilla. I do have a pinch of the monk fruit sugar because it's not sweet. This yogurt is not sweet at all. We've got a lot of sweetness from the chocolate there, but I wanted to add a little bit more. And keep in mind, if you're doing the chocolate type of custard pie or utilizing that technique, you can control the amount of sugar with the chocolate that you choose. I wouldn't use bittersweet baker's chocolate with no sugar. If you've ever eaten that before, you'll know that chocolate bars with 0 sugar don't taste that good. They're always used in baking, but a bittersweet or anything above that would work fine. And you just adjust the sugar content based on the sugar content of the chocolate. And then a little bit of orange zest. And I can mix that up and put it on top. Sometimes we would use sour cream in industry. We put chopped mac nuts here and then we let it set and cool. And then we put a layer of a sour cream mixture very similar to this. But I wanted to go with yogurt because it's a little healthier. And because it's warm, I probably shouldn't put it on top, but I'm going to anyway. Sorry, Jackie. You're the guinea pig. So anyway, so hopefully it will, it won't like melt too much. Taste it.
So Holly wanted to find out, can you use unsweetened cocoa powder, stevia, or non-sugar?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, any of those sugar substitutes will work. So you'll notice as we kind of go through these series where, you know, it may be boring for a lot of people because I always like focus on components or categories or techniques. But the reason I do that is so that you can come back, like you just said, with that question, substitute this for that. You just have to think, okay, what degree of sweetness do I get from stevia or from monk fruit sugar or some of the other substitutes that exist out there. They all have different degrees of sweetness. So you just have to make that adjustment, experiment a little bit. Most of those charts are available today that tell you, to what degree each of those works as a substitute for the other. And then it makes it a little easier for you as a home baker. But yeah, absolutely. Feel free to get creative. And then I'm just going to swirl this around a little bit. And maybe we'll get a little bit of the chocolate swirl to come through.
What do you call the chocolate rounds you used?
Oh, this is a French chocolate. I got it at Chef's Zone, but any chocolate bar that you like or whatever will work. Just make sure it's small pieces. Don't take large, giant chunks and throw them in. These are called pistoles, or the little discs. I have some here. And they're usually made for commercial use just because they melt quickly because they're nice and small. But at home, all you have to do is chop up the pieces and they'll work. And then I'll sprinkle a few on top. Those might be a little too big, Jackie, sorry, because they'll be a little crisp. But it's chocolate, so I don't know if there's such a thing as too big a piece. And then that.
Sandra wanted to know, does the chocolate pie need to be chilled to set?
Yeah, this will probably be set at room temperature, but ideally, yeah, you'd put it in the refrigerator, let that custard set. And that's a really good question because, it's kind of easy to do what we're doing here in the sense that, we're enjoying it with family or you're eating it at home. But what you think about in industry, and I've talked to folks about this or even on the show, where would this be served? If it was in the middle of summer and we were having a luau outside at noon and it might top around 90 degrees, I'm going to add more chocolate to my filling, or I would need more cornstarch or some form of binding agent that'll make sure that that wedge of pie doesn't melt or fall over outdoors in 90-degree weather. If it's indoor like it is here and the temperature is 72 degrees, it's an air-conditioned ballroom, it's a sit-down dinner, you would use a different ratio of chocolate. So for professionals, that becomes sort of the hard part, is dialing in the amount of binding or whatever it is to fit the recipe for the particular scenario. So that's just another layer of complexity. We don't have to deal with that at home. No one's going to complain about a wedge of pie drooping a little bit at the dinner table. Hopefully not, anyways. But in a ballroom or in a paid event, the customer might be disappointed if the thing's flopping or falling apart, or if it's so stiff that you can't get a fork through it. So you have to, just really practice and dial in those quantities so that everything turns out the way you want it to. Really, really good question.
Beverly wants to know, can you use fat-free milk to make the custard?
Oh, absolutely, Beverly. Any liquid would work. You could use water, honestly. As you look at those categories and think about the tarts that you might like, what's really popular in Hawaii is the custard tarts, the little custard ones, usually milk and egg and sugar, sometimes vanilla. It depends on where you're buying it, the little Chinese style or even the dim sum style that you get. Very popular. So it's milk, it's lemon juice, it's eggs. Oh, sorry, I put that too far back. And lemon curd is a popular filling. So in that case, in a lemon tart or a lemon bar, the liquid is lemon juice. And then they're using eggs as a binding agent, primarily egg yolks usually, to get that nice rich yellow, and sugar, and that's it. So yeah, absolutely. Skim milk, almond milk, soy milk. I stay away from like heavy cream. It just gets a little too rich. If this were heavy cream with chocolate and then a layer of caramel and then a layer of that's what we do in industry or used to back in the day. But I can't eat like that anymore. Tastes good, but a little too rich, a little bit on the too rich side for what we're doing.
Okay.
But a little bit of mint, a little bit of orange zest on top of this. And if this sets up, it'll probably only take about an hour or so in the fridge and it should be ready to go.
Okay, there was,
Sorry, I
There's one-
ran a little late tonight.
sure. There's one more quick question.
Yeah, of course.
Would arrowroot powder work, or should I use cornstarch as a thickener?
Any of those thickening agents would work fine. Arrowroot, cornstarch, tapioca starch, rice flour. There's so many, any finely ground starch will work fine. The only trick that I find today is people get a little confused with things like almond flour, right? You think, oh, it's they call it almond flour because it can be substituted for flour. It can't. Almond flour is just ground 100% nuts. So there's no thickening from an almond that's ground fine, other than like, making it maybe like a paste of some sort. But arrowroot and all of your fine ground powdery starches work fine. The ratios vary. You've got to watch that, but look at the chart. You can find equivalents for cornstarch to arrowroot, etc. Online, no problem. If I didn't have starch, I could have just used an extra egg. It would have worked fine. So, there's lots of different ways to do that. And if you were watching your cholesterol, pull those yolks out. You could probably use 4 egg whites instead of 2 whole eggs, and it would work the same. The flavor would be a little different, right? The texture is a little different, but you'd still get that binding agent aspect.
Okay. Well, there is one more question. What spices, other fruits did you use on the peace galette?
Oh, this one, Carolyn Yamada, our marketing director, or one of them, dropped off some candied fruit because she makes a really delicious fruit cake with her family. And there was one on my desk yesterday, and then she'll always give me the leftovers. So you might see a couple pieces of green in there, and that's some candied citron. It was a mixture that you get in the supermarket this time of year. It has lemon and lime rind in it. It has usually diced cherries and different things. I see a little diced cherry over here. So this one was, peaches, raisins, a little bit of that citron mixed together. This one here, because I didn't have a lot of the peach left over, I added half of that can of the apple that I purchased. So it has the same ingredients that were in the peach one here, but it also had the apples. And then I threw in a pinch of ginger powder. So this one's a little bit different as well. So the sky's the limit for whatever you want to use and add to it. But that's a great question. And then there's my email again, if you have questions, or if you're looking for a basic custard recipe, or if you need those recipes from last week, I'll do my homework and get back to you. I hope.
Okay,
Oh,
great.
okay. Alice will email me. I'll email Jackie. Jackie will email you. And we'll get it done. One way or another.
Sounds like a plan. I'll also include last week's recipes if I get them.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks so much. Sorry it took so long. We ran over. It's like almost 6, but.
Thanks so much, Chef Swift, and thanks to those of you watching from home. We hope you'll join us next week just for a holiday meal for 2 pot roasts with a twist. Good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.